One of the oldest and deepest human questions, posed, for example, by Socrates many centuries ago: how does one live well in the city? The question of living a life that's not only successful, but more importantly, meaningful or purposeful, is at the heart of many people's lives, often unarticulated. Dr. Paul, you have a really remarkable story about this search for meaning in your own life. Would you like to share with our viewers your own account of that story?
Sure. Back in the early 1990s, I was questioning the purpose of life and looking for meaning to existence and to life, as we all ask ourselves throughout the history, throughout the ages. And I had the opportunity to contact Mother Teresa. She had had a heart attack in La Jolla, California, 1992, and I thought she'd probably be recuperating in one of her homeless shelters in Tijuana, Mexico. So I called, I had permission to go. And at the time, I felt a considerable amount of concern whether I was living a good Christian life or what it means to be a good Christian physician as a vocation and profession. So I sought her out. I flew down to San Diego, rented a car, and met her in Tijuana on a very hot summer day. And I had a singular question for her. The question I asked her was, Mother, can you tell me what Jesus is going to tell me at the moment of my death? What is he going to ask me at the moment of my death? Because if I understood what criteria he's going to use to judge me worthy, then I would have a more clear understanding of the purpose of life, of what it means to be a good Catholic physician. I thought the answer would be quite complex, but she found it to be very simple. And she directed me to Matthew 25. She said that was a foundation of a religious order. And she specifically told me, and here's how she described it. She said, at the time of your death, or when you close your eyes for the last time, Jesus said clearly in Matthew 25, he's going to separate all of us just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. We've heard this 1,000 times. And those on the right, he'll say, you shall enter the kingdom of glory. Because I was hungry, you fed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was sick, which was very important to me, and you tended to me. And they will say, but Lord, when did we see you naked or hungry? We didn't know it was you. And he will say, and she took my hand, and she raised my 5 fingers, and she said, Jesus said, I'll tell you the truth, whatever you do for the least of my brothers and sisters. And she touched each of my fingers, and she said, you did it to me. You did it to me. She told me specifically, Jesus Christ comes in the distressing disguise of the poor every day, the leper, the hungry, the lonely, those suffering, and asked us to love him. She explained to me that you'll be judged on how you love, how you gave yourself out for others, how you served humanity with compassion.
It's interesting that this encounter took place at your own desire to see her at the top of a very successful career. It's not as though you were flailing in your career at the top of your game, and yet you felt something lacking, and that was purposefulness or meaning.
Right. At the time, in 1991 actually, I felt a sense of anxiety and stress, additional stress. And I thought probably it was because of lack of further materialism. So I thought, I'll see more patients, I'll make more money, and I'll become a chief of the Department of Cardiology. A year later, I was chief of the Department of Cardiology, I made more money. I was seeing more patients, I was more miserable.
Yeah.
And I'm happy and
when everything you always wanted wasn't enough.
Everything that I thought would give me what is conventionally considered success in a materialistic world, I had achieved, and I was empty.
Lisa, you must, in your work at the Career Center, encounter students all the time. You deal, I know, mostly with graduate students. What are the questions they bring? Are they able to articulate their desires, or what are the most common questions you encounter among the students?
Well, I think one of the things that they often come in with is this sense of, is this really where I should be? So in graduate school, any graduate student knows you invest a lot of time, a lot of energy. You have to be really more than 100% committed, as you know. And I think there has to be this incredible passion, and you have to, you know, it's not all good times. It's some very tough work. And so they often will come in feeling this kind of discontentment, wondering, am I in the right spot? Am I using the talents that I have in the right way? And often they feel some kind of disconnect. I mean, in other words, they came in thinking it would be one way, and it's a different way. So,
what you mentioned the words talents or gifts. One of the key things, it seems to me, is to identify what those are, not just in terms of skill set, but also connecting that with passion. In other words, I suspect it's not enough just to be good at something. You have to do something you love or enjoy.
Well, exactly. And I think so many of the students here, they're so bright. They're probably good at lots of things. And I think actually many of them ended up here in graduate school because they were very good at what they were doing. They had faculty that said, "You're really bright. You should go to graduate school." And so here they are. And they get into their program, and maybe halfway through, maybe even before that, they can't sleep quite as well at night, and they're thinking, should I be here? Why did I choose to come here? I may be good at doing this, maybe I'm strong in science, strong at math, but is this what I love? Is this what gives me joy? And I think they come to my office to maybe try to seek someone or some test or something that will tell them, what should I do? We
They
go a
often
different
desire, I
route.
think, more clarity than it's possible for any of us in this life. And I think
Right.
sometimes they just like you to give them the answer, or
Right.
me to give them the answer. I talked to an undergraduate recently who is extremely good at his major, but he doesn't enjoy it. And he has no trouble with the academic component. He doesn't hate it, doesn't dislike it, but it's not life-giving to him. He's actually taking a very different course. He's changing majors radically because he found something that he really loves, and he's going to pursue that instead.
Do you have any practical suggestions for how one begins to identify what gives them joy, where their gifts are, so that when people finish this program, they have something tangible that they can do?
I do. I have an exercise that I hand out to individuals, so people can do it at home, certainly. I also do it in a group exercise kind of format. It's very simple. It's called kind of the stories exercise, stories of accomplishment or success stories. And what you do is you take some time, you think back over your life, and you think about 10 to 15 experiences, stories, which have these three components. The first component is that you considered it successful or an accomplishment. It doesn't matter if anyone else thought it was a success or an accomplishment. There are things that sometimes only you know. It doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be the typical, I was valedictorian, but you considered it was an accomplishment. The second thing is you had to have been the main shaker, mover in that story. And the third thing is, and this is the one that many of my graduate students cannot come up with. They'll have a list of 10 that fill the other two criteria, but then when they have to put the third criteria in there, it can be very difficult for any of us. And that is, you have to have truly enjoyed it. And this is the idea of passion and joy comes in. So, you have this list of 10 or 15 things. Then I ask them to write a full page or more about each of those experiences, to really just take time and think about, well, how did I come up with that idea? Who else was involved? Did I have ways to involve other people or to make this grow once I started the beginning project? To speak everything about that, to write it down. Then you get with a group of people, maybe 3 to 4 other people. You read your stories to the other people, and they help you, and you'll see this too, but they help you to find the thread or the theme, the pattern that runs through your stories. It's amazing. I've never seen anyone not be surprised at what they find. Very powerful, very simple. You don't have to pay to take a test. Anyone can do it.
In your experiences with Mother Teresa, were there any occasions where she witnessed to you insight about talents and gifts and understanding your direction?
Many experiences, but one specifically stands out in my mind. When I was with her in Calcutta, she was showing me the house of the dying, where they isolate the men on one side, the women on the other side. And there was a woman, I believe, who came in a wheelbarrow, and she had wet leprosy and some gangrene of half of her body. It was obvious to me as a physician she probably had 20 minutes to live. And at that point, Mother Teresa said, "Come help me bathe this person." And she took this person and bathed this person like a mother would bathe her newborn child, absolutely with the gentleness and the compassion. But the smell was so intense, I couldn't maintain in that environment. And I left the house of the dying, and about 20 minutes after she had finished, she came out and she sat down and she said, let me explain something to you. When you're choosing what to do in life and how to serve, we're not all called to serve in the same capacity. She told me, see, you thought you could do what I do as a missionary to charity, but you couldn't do that. But you see, I can't do what you do as a cardiologist, but together we do something beautiful for Jesus. And her point was that we're all given God-given talents. We're all called to serve humanity and God within humanity with compassion. But if we're going to enjoy it, we have to assess our God-given talents, focus in a direction of vocation or profession where we could utilize those God-given talents. And that's our best chance to have a sustainable sense of joy, inner peace, and happiness in the profession.
You mentioned the identification. You both had kind of an epiphany moment in terms of your experience with these students, opening up to them what their particular gifts are, and your own experience of meeting Mother Teresa. That's just the beginning, however. I mean, to recognize, oh, I want to have purpose in my life, that's one thing. Then that's just the beginning of a process of what you might call transformation or transitioning to a way of life that, in fact, gives sort of satisfaction and meaning. And what steps do you think people should take? Let's say they recognize either they've done this before or in conversation with friends or perhaps even by listening to your accounts, they realize, I'm looking more for greater meaning or purpose in my life. What suggestions would one of you give or both of you give to someone asking that very question who's listening tonight?
I think that there has to be there's an enormous sense of sustainable peace just knowing that you're on track. What I want to hear from Mother Teresa is, I want an answer that I can understand, nothing that's complex. But I understand now truly, because there was such a rightness to it when she explained it to me again in the way she did, is that, first of all, you have to accept the premise that as a human being, you have responsibilities. You're called to serve humanity and God within humanity. Once you understand that, you lock that in, then I think there's a necessity to define what you feel is success. Because especially with undergraduate and graduate students, even physicians that are 50 and 60 years old, everybody wants to be successful, but I don't think they can articulate a definition of success. And if the definition of success is more title, more power, more money, more prestige, you're going in the wrong direction. You're going to find yourself empty, you're going to find quick fixes, but nothing sustainable. If you find a profession where there's deep meaning, you can enjoy serving in that capacity, there's your response. So I think you really have to assess yourself, sit back, assess those God-given talents, and direct yourself in a profession or region where you can serve with those talents.
In some ways, I think it means sort of redefining or tweaking your understanding of success. I think some people have a very sort of narrow or sclerotic view of success as in terms of prestige or the money that they acquire, the possessions or reputation they earn. None of those things are bad, of course. I think the mistake is we often think that success is the means to happiness.
Right.
That if I'll be happy as soon as I'm successful.
Or materialism is a mean to happiness.
Exactly. Success defined in terms of materialism.
Right.
As the mean, instead of just finding something that gives joy and then in that finding one's success.
I think if you structure the definition of success, and the one I found that's that's deepest for me as a Christian and also as a professional, is enjoying serving humanity with compassion. I think that includes it all. We're all called to serve humanity. We're called to do with compassion, that is, desire to alleviate the suffering of another, and find a vocation where you can enjoy that. If you utilize that as your definition of success, then you're going to enjoy the experience, and then whatever comes out of that, whether it be title, money, prestige, so be it. Mm-hmm. But if you focus on the power, prestige, and title first and initially, there's where you're lost.
Sure. Then
you fall into an abyss where how much is enough? Where can I get more? It's not working.
Well, and it also, to illustrate Mother Teresa's point, that people can do very different things and still find a great deal of satisfaction in them, because what they're doing is that however they're serving, they may serve. You and I, for example, obviously your skill set and my skill set are very different. I think we both enjoy our life and find joy in our lives, and yet mine and yours are not the same, but we both can serve humanity in different ways.
One thing I like that, it's very interesting, is that there's such a priority in Western civilization on youth, materialism, finances, money, power. But if you go to Latin American countries, for example, where I've spent a considerable amount of time, there, if you ask a mother who's a patient, you ask her what her profession is, she says, ama de la casa. I'm the love of the house. Corazón de la casa. I'm the heart of the house. And this is the most prestigious position you could possibly have, because she's responsible for the children and the grandchildren and her parents in the community. And there's a tremendous amount of respect in that as a vocation. And there can be few vocations more important that requires more focus, more discipline than mother of the house.
How do we, discern basically a vocation? And the one thing I was thinking as Paul was speaking as well was this idea of, okay, we're going to go in, we're going to figure out what are our gifts, kind of a self-centered type of thing. But actually, it should be very, we should get input from other people as well. Very, very important, I think. And it's important, I think, to not feel like you have to figure this all out before you begin. The word vocation, I think, means voice. So in a sense, we're being called. So in order to hear a voice, we have to listen. So we do have to be quiet. We have to, get away from the busyness of life. But we also should ask other people for their input. And also, where has God placed us right now? We may have a talent for, opera singing, but if we're living in Haiti and there's not a place to do that, maybe we're called to do something else with our music. So our context, where we are, is very important as well, and getting that feedback from other people.
Well, I think that's borne out in the Gospels, and this is so counterintuitive to us because we want to know before we make any commitments. And I think that's in some ways what the students are looking for if they come to the Career Center. Give me a quick answer so that I know what commitment to make. And in the Gospels, however, Jesus, calls the disciples. They don't do a background check. They don't read all his books as articles. They don't look for references. They follow him. And it's only by living with him, in John's Gospel in particular, the first question the disciples ask Jesus is, where do you stay? Not who are you, not what's your name, not what do you do. Where do you stay? And then Jesus responds, come and see. And you have to come live with me before you can understand me. And you have to live your way into a vocation, so to speak. It's not so much you're going to have it all mapped out intellectually prior, and then after that commitment, be able to, figure it all out. And you've got to make that commitment first, and then make that move. And it's in the process of living that the understanding comes. If you think of joy, I think we think of joy, 2 Sundays of the year in the church's calendar, once during Lenten, once during Advent, it's Laetaria Gaudete Sundays. The emphasis is on joy, and I think we make the mistake of joy means somehow ruckus or loud celebration or giddiness or silliness, but in fact, joy is the happiness that comes from dispossession of self. That the moment we forget about ourselves, we're most free. Think of one of the deepest joys when we give a gift to someone we love, and it's the giving of that gift that in fact gives us a greater kind of satisfaction and joy. And we've forgotten entirely about ourselves at that moment. Sure. It's not as though we're sitting there like, oh, this is wonderful for me. No, it's totally other-centered. And I think the deepest joys in our life, as a married person, you must know this. Vocation of marriage is always that giving of self is the deepest kind of joy, and it's life-giving to your spouse and to you. And that's what's beautiful about it. So I think if we have to redefine success, redefine joy, not in terms of just what makes me happy, but a deeper kind of happiness that comes from the forgetting of oneself, putting one's own will aside, and serving others. But again, it's not something you can talk someone into, as you said, Paul. They've got to experience it. Once you experience it, young people at Notre Dame, Center for Social Concerns and other opportunities, these young people who come often from very nice backgrounds will spend their fall breaks working in very poor regions of the country, building houses, helping the poor. Those kids come back so often on fire. Because they are found that's such a life-giving experience. They got less sleep than they usually do. They slept on the gym floor. They traveled by a van. It was not, the lap of luxury by any means, but it's precisely in this experience of incredible service that they fall in love with the whole idea of giving their lives to others in service. But that doesn't happen unless they do it. I could give a talk about it. You could give a talk about it. Some student could give a talk about it. It's far less persuasive than the actual experience of giving one's life.
Also, that concept of joy can't be misinterpreted that when you're serving, it's all feel-good experience. And I think that's interesting point is agapic love or self-giving can be painful. It's uncomfortable sometimes. It can drain you. I know as a physician, you're giving yourself physically, mentally, psychologically, spiritually, patients. You can drain yourself in many capacities. You need to replenish that and find community to help you find that. But if you're willing to self-give, okay, that's when the sustainable joy, inner peace, and happiness settles in.
I think, well, and I think so much of what people hear today is the prosperity gospel, that if you love Jesus, you'll somehow be really successful and prosper, and you won't be tired, and you get lots of success. Any glance at a crucifix for 5 seconds tells you that's not the way it works. That's that utterly pouring oneself out. But I think, again, in talking to parents, I've never had the vocation of parenthood, obviously, and of course today's Mother's Day, and we're thinking of all of our own mothers. The life that a mother gives to it. I mean, think of mothers that first couple of weeks after a child is born, all the sleep deprivation, all the exhaustion, and they're so happy.
Mm-hmm.
They're filled with joy because of that life that they've given life to and that they would give their life for in a heartbeat. And that's the kind of love and service that we're thinking. I mean, that's really what we're getting at.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point.
I think the idea, too, of just the fact that as Christians, we're given a purpose. I mean, God has given us a purpose for being here. And when we have that purpose and that attitude, we don't get as tired when we're doing this kind of work, just like the mother. The love is so deep, and that makes all the difference.
Well, and I think thinking in terms of vocation, and I think the danger of this is when as soon as you hear a priest say vocation, people think, oh, priests and nuns, and then maybe a throwaway line about married people. When I talk about vocation to the grade school children in my parish, for example, I talk about those like 4 or 5 different levels. First is just the vocation to existence. That the very fact that you or I exist is pure gift of God. And that itself is He calls us into being. The second level, the vocation to holiness that comes with baptism. There's obviously the vocation to state of life, married, single, religious, consecrated, ordained. But then there's, as you say, there's a particular vocation each day. That in fact God is calling us to something each day. We need to be attentive to how is it that I can live that vocation, given the circumstances of my life, my own limitations, my own gifts and strengths. How is it this particular day, in this particular moment, in these particular circumstances, that I can somehow make a gift of myself to others?